So in this video, we want to continue working on our particle spawning and the game objects, and then eventually take the game objects that spawn after the particles are emitted from the tree, and then they turn into game objects over here, and actually turn this into something you can pick up by walking over them. So the first thing we want to do, though, is to fix the spawn location for these particles turning into game objects. So that's actually pretty simple. We need to go into the Harvestable object prefab here, and then where we have simulation space at the top for Harvestable object, change that to world. This is going to make it so that each of the particles have their own independent location transform space inside of the world. So now if we hit play, that's going to fix the spawning of the game objects. So they spawn at the exact location now of where the particles disappear. So it's seamless between when the particle disappears and the game object is set up to replace it. So that's what we're looking for there. If you want the game objects to be a little bit closer to the tree, then we can simply go to the Harvestable object and shrink the size of this circle collider. So let's go down to the bottom over here, and maybe if we make it something like 0.2, then that will be closer to the tree when they turn into game objects. So now if we hit play, it'll look kind of like this. So you can see they end up much closer to where the tree was at. So that's probably a more reasonable circle collider radius size. Another thing we want to improve is that our gatherer, when it hits the tree, should only be able to actually damage the harvestable objects like the tree when we're using the use action animation. So in order to do that, go into the gatherer prefab, and for the tool game object under the gatherer, we need to disable the polygon collider in all cases except when we are using the tool and we have the polygon collider enabled at the exact moment of hitting the tree. So basically, anytime that we're not actively in that state of hitting an object, we can't actually damage the tree or another harvestable object. So if we go to the animation window and we look at our swing animation, you'll see that there's no mention of the polygon collider under the tool for these animations. So we need to set that up, and we can do that by going to Add Property, do Tool, and then choose the polygon collider here and the enabled property. Double click to add it there. You might need to expand the window so that it's actually visible. So polygon collider enabled, polygon collider 2D enabled, add that. And on the first frame of an animation, we want to disable it. So go to frame 00 and disable it. Then at frame 02 for our swing animations, we want to enable it. And then at the end of our animation over here, frame 03, we want to disable the box collider. So now if we hit play, you'll see that the box collider is only enabled at that moment when the axe is actually hitting the object in front of it. So that's going to help us with controlling damaging the harvestable objects. Now you need to do the same thing for the other swing animations, since they all have 3 frames of animation followed by turning things off at 03 when the animations are done. So to select all of these and copy them, hold left mouse button down and drag a box around these 3 keyframes. Control C to copy them, go to the other animations, and paste them with the main cursor at 00. So Control V, paste it in, and now we have the same setup where it's only enabled at 02. So do that for the other animations. Control V to paste it in, swing up, Control V to paste it in. So now the only thing we need to do is to make sure that by default the polygon collider is disabled. So go to the inspector and just disable the polygon collider by default. So now it will only turn on when it's in these swing animations. And because we turn it off after the animation is done, we don't need to worry about customizing anything for the colliders on these animations, which are going to have nothing to do with our object colliding and trying to harvest trees, like walk and idle. So that should solve that problem. Let's go back out and hit play. If we walk at the tree, it's not going to damage it, but if we go to the tree and hit F, you can see that now we have our harvesting working as intended. So now we just need to make it so we can actually go ahead and pick up these game objects and add them to our inventory. So if I click on this instance of the prefab resource word brown, you'll see that currently they don't have any script attached to them, so there's no information for determining if the item should be picked up and added to the player's inventory. And the player also doesn't have an inventory in order to hold these type of resource objects. So we're going to need at least 2 scripts in order to set this up. Let's start by adding a component, and we'll add a new script. I think I will call it resource pickup. So whenever we want to have an object that can be picked up and added to the character's resource inventory, this is going to have the code in order to do that. So let's create and add our script. But before we actually edit the resource pickup script, let's actually create a resource scriptable object so that we have a item that has certain data attached to it, maybe like the value of the item or the name of it and the icon associated with it. And we'll add that information to a scriptable object called resource. And then when we pick up the resource, we'll attach exactly which resource gets picked up for each resource pickup script over here. And then we add that to the player's inventory. So we need that resource added first. So let's go into the scripts folder. I'm going to right click and create a new script, C# script, and I will just call this one resource. Now, if the resource pickup and any other scripts aren't already in this folder, go to the assets folder and bring them in. So I'm going to drag resource pickup into the scripts folder, and game object emitter, let's put that in there as well. Okay, so we just cleaned up the project. All the scripts are now in one folder. And now let's go into scripts and double click on the resource script. So now let's go into scripts and double click on the resource script. So right now it's being set as a mono behavior, but what we want to do is have the resource be something that can be defined and saved into the assets folder of the project. So it won't exist inside of the scene. This will just be the details of what the resource is inside of the entire game world. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is change this into a scriptable object as something that can be defined and saved inside the assets folder of our project. So this definition for the resource will not exist in the scene, but in the entire project. So the first thing I want to do is take the resource and change it into a scriptable object so that we can define different types of resources in the assets folder of our project. And that means we're going to need a create asset menu. So in the create asset menu tag up here at the top, I'm going to do file name, and let's just call it a resource. And menu name, we'll do the solution name for the project, which is gatherer top-down RPG / resource. You can use whatever menu path you want. That's just how I've been setting it up so far. So now we need to give it the start update methods. Those aren't a thing for scriptable objects. And now we can define what kind of data that each resource asset should store. So let's start with a field, serialized field, and I'll have a public string display name as how we want to display the in-game name for this object in the project. So we'll have a get and a private set. The private set is so that we can not change it from an outside script, but this will be something that is consistent or only editable inside of the resource script itself. And then let's add in another field, serialized field, and I'll do public sprite, and we'll do icon. So get private set. This will be how we want it to display in the UI whenever we are showing the resource. We'll have this icon show up to represent the resource. And then maybe we want some other fields like field, serialized field, public string description, get private set. And you can add as many extra fields that all resources should have as it applies to what you want your game to be. So for instance, another one could be field, serialized field, public int, or maybe a float for value, get private set. And then now if you're going to have any kind of currency system going on in your game where you buy or sell resources with money, then now you have a value property that you can set the value of what 1 unit of this resource should be. So feel free to add as many extra details to your resources as you need. If you want to create a secondary class of resource, you could always inherit from this resource class and then add extra fields on top of it. If there's supposed to be one type of item or resource that has certain data associated with it that the rest don't need, then you can do that as well. You don't have to have every resource have every single field. But this is a good basic start for what we're going to do in our project. So let's go out to the project and let's open up, let's say, the resources folder, and let's right click here, create a new gatherer top-down RPG item, and we'll do resource. So the resource here was going to be resource underscore Ward Brown, and hit enter. So this resource file is different than the prefab here. The prefab is for the game object that exists inside of our scene. And then the resource scriptable object is for storing all of the data that whenever we need to reference this resource as a unit of something in the game, these should be the details for it. So for instance, for the display name here, we could say brown wood. For the icon, we can look for the same sprite that we're using for the game object. So wood brown, and add that in there. And then for the description, we could say basic wood for building furniture and buildings. And then for the value, we could just set to 1. So whether you're using gold or whatever as your money in the game, it has a value of 1. Okay, so we have this resource, and we have the game object for the resource. So let's make it so that when we pick up the game object, remove the game object from the scene, we still add it to the player's inventory as that scriptable object resource file. So for the resource wood brown we have in the scene, we want to make sure that all copies of resource wood brown have this new resource pickup script. So let's remove the component, and I'll double click into the prefab. Let's add it here. So resource pickup as the script. Doesn't seem like it's being recognized here. We might need to go and edit it first. So in scripts, let's double click resource pickup. I'll go ahead and Control S to save it here. And yes, we can see that the domain is reloading. So now that that's done, the script should be recognized and we can add it as a component. So resource pickup is what we want here. Now we need a field to have that resource scriptable object be able to be set here. And then we'll be able to pick that up to the player's inventory. So inside of the resource pickup script, let's add in a property with a field backing it. So a field, serialized field for the backing field, and then public resource. And you do want to be sure that this resource class we're talking about is the resource class that we're writing, not any other default resources that may exist in the Unity engine. So just be careful about that if you ever get any conflicts. So now we need to name the property. We could give it resource type. Get private set. Okay. And now we just need to have a trigger where when the player walks into the resource pickup radius, either the player's inventory just picks up the resource or the resource adds itself to the player's inventory. But logically speaking, I think it makes more sense for the player with the inventory to pick up the resource. So we'll add that in an inventory script rather than on this resource pickup script. So let's go back out to the Unity editor, and you can see we now have this field we can set for the resource type. So let's select a resource type. We have resource wood brown, and let's go back out to the main scene and enter the gatherer prefab. So an inventory is something that there's a good chance different characters in our game are going to want to have. So we can make it a separate script from the player controller so that enemies or players or NPCs that might want an inventory can just add it as a component, and we don't need to just add it straight into the player controller script, which is obviously only going to be used for the player. So let's add in a new component here, making sure we're in prefab mode, and let's call it either inventory or resource inventory, whatever makes sense to you. We can just do inventory for right now and create an add. So let's edit the script. So for the inventory in this game, I'm going to want it to be able to hold a list of all the resources and the count of each of those resources that we have collected. So earlier in the project, I used Unity serializable dictionary in order to set up stuff like state animations, linking a character state to a directional animation set. So we can use the same serializable dictionary in order to set up the inventory. So if you haven't already added the Unity serializable dictionary to your project, you can easily find it on GitHub. And this plugin is by As6 McAzzy, if I'm saying that right. Unity serializable dictionary. And then once it's in there, we can do this field serialized field public serializable dictionary, and we give it a type. And the type of this dictionary is going to be the key, which is resource, and then the value, which is a count integer. And then let's call this dictionary resources with a get private set. Now, if we take a look back out in Unity, we'll see that we have this resources dictionary and it's serialized here. So we could add it and give it a type of resource like resource word brown and set a count like 5 to it. So the thing here is I don't want to start with the resources added. I want them to automatically add themselves after we pick them up. So we're going to need to write a couple functions for our inventory script. So what we're going to want to do in the inventory script is make it so that we have to set the resources through a custom method we set up, which is going to see if the resource already exists inside of the dictionary. And if so, we're going to add the new count of resources we're adding to the existing count of resources that already exist. Otherwise, if the resource isn't in the inventory, then we create a new key value pair inside of the dictionary and just add that in. So because of that, we don't really want to be editing the resources directly from other scripts. So I'm going to take the serializable dictionary here, and we're just going to make it private, and that's going to be for both the get and the set. So we'll Control S, save that, take a look out in the project, and we can still see that we have the serialized resources dictionary. But now we need to create some methods for a custom way of accessing the resources inside of this script. So first off, I'll create one for getting the amount of resources inside of the script. So this will be a public int get resource count. And let's see, we're gonna need a type of resource. And then we'll do a check if we actually find the resource type in the dictionary. So we'll do resources dot try get value. Okay, and this is going to be using the key. So the key is the type, and we're going to out this to an integer value. And this will be current count. And we wrap this in an if statement because try get value returns a Boolean. So we can use that to go into this code where we just return the current count if it exists. Otherwise, if it fails to find the key, then there are none of that resource in the inside of the serializable dictionary, so we'll just return 0. So that basically serves for getting the resource count if we need to know that in any other script. So now let's work on setting the resources inside of the resources dictionary. So we can make a new function. So I'll make this a public int so we can return the new count after adding the resources to the dictionary, and we'll do add resources with a resource type and a int count to add to the dictionary. So for setting the resource dictionary, what we can do is take, let's say, resources at the type index and plus equals the count. And I'm not totally sure if this will work as I think it will. Basically, check if it already exists. If so, return the current count and add that to the new count we're adding to it to get the final value. And if this is the first time we're adding, then it's going to start with a 0 and add the count in. So we want to take all that and return it. And we'll be able to see if that actually works by going around and picking up the different objects on the screen. So in terms of using the inventory, we could add the ability to pick up objects straight into the inventory script, or we can separate that into a different component script, which might be preferable because maybe not every character that has an inventory should also be able to pick up objects by themselves. So let's add in another script inside of the Unity inspector. So with the inventory, we're going to add a new script. I guess I'll call this the pickup resources script, create and add. Okay, so now to have the pickup of resources be a separate script, let's take the gatherer main object, add a component to it, and let's add a new script. I'm going to call it pickup resources, not to be confused with resources pickup, which is the actual thing we're picking up. So create and add this script, and let's go ahead and edit the script. So here we need access to the inventory component. I don't want to necessarily force the inventory to have to be on the same game object. So to be a little bit more flexible, let's add in field serialized field, public inventory, and we'll call this inventory get private set. And maybe we even call it resources inventory, because this is only for picking up resources, nothing else. Okay, now get rid of start and update the inventory. We'll set that manually in the inspector. And then we need to check when our capsule collider of the player, or any attached collider to this game object, goes into its collision with another game object. So since the pickups are going to be in trigger mode, I can't remember off the top of my head if we need on trigger 2D for entering the radius or on collision 2D, because this collider is not a trigger collider, but actually just a physics collider. So let's start with collision enter 2D. If that doesn't work, then we'll do on trigger enter 2D. And then when we collide with something, we just need to check if its type has a resource pickup component. So let's do resource pickup equals collision.gameObject.getComponent resources pickup. If the pickup is valid, then we're going to add it, whatever it's containing to the inventory. So inventory.add resources. So the type of resource is going to be the pickup dot, let's see, what do we call it? Type, resource type. And then the count is going to be 1. Since, at least as things are set up, the pickup only has 1 item inside of it. You could add count to resources pickup if you want to be able to pick up more than 1 item from one game object, but that's kind of up to you. So we're just going to add 1 resource to our inventory. Okay, so now in the gatherer, let's go down here. We need to set the inventory, so I'm going to drag the inventory script into here. We already have the capsule collider, which is going to be used in this pickup resources automatically, since these already get the message from the same game object. So whenever the collider actually collides with something, anything that's on the same game object will be able to run this on collision enter 2D. Okay, so with all that done, we may be able to get this to work. So let's go ahead and hit play, and let's start harvesting these tree objects. So I'm going to hit F. We get a game object to spawn. I'm going to run into it, and nothing yet. So what's missing from our resource wood brown, if we check the instance and the prefab, is that it actually has no collider yet. So let's add in some kind of collider, I guess a circle collider 2D. Let's add this in, shrink the radius a little bit. So 0.06 is pretty good here. And I'll set is trigger on. Since this shouldn't be a physics object, it should only be used by triggers for getting picked up. Now if we hit play, we'll see if our character picks it up. And it looks like it's not picking up the object still. And that's probably because it requires onTrigger enter 2D, as I suspected. So if we go back to the script now, it's a pretty quick fix. We'll just do onTrigger enter 2D, and then we copy paste this code down here. And we can remove on collision enter 2D, since that is for physics objects interacting with physics objects. And basically the same idea. When a trigger collider enters this area, we'll see if it's a resource pickup and then add it to the inventory if so. And one last thing I did forget here, we should also destroy that resource game object. So destroy pickup.gameObject. We can do that here. So let's go to the game view, hit play, and okay, we can see we got something here. The given key was not present in the dictionary, so it was trying to add it to the inventory, which is good. But we got to go back to the inventory script and change this a little bit. So first we got to actually validly check to make sure that the resource is in the dictionary. So we can use that if resources try get value bit again. So let's do if resources try get value. So then we have the count that's in the dictionary, which in this case we can do this resources type plus equals count, which should be the same as doing resources type equals current count plus count. But if that's not the case, then we're adding the first resource to the dictionary. So let's do resources.add type and count. So that should set up the dictionary to have a key value pair for this type now. And then we want to return the count that we just added to that. Okay, so this should be our only 2 cases. Let's go back out to the game, hit play, and see if it validly adds to our inventory. And considering that it disappeared from the screen, I think it probably worked. So let's check the hierarchy, go to the gatherer, scroll down to find our inventory, and you can see we have 1 unit of the resources brown. Now to make sure that this still works after we collect more items, let's hit the tree. So I'm going to go up to it, press F. Now let's pick up these game objects, run into it. Okay, we have 2 wood brown resources now, and now we can come down here, collect another one. And we can keep harvesting the tree until we've exhausted it of all its resources. Collect these resources. So we have 5 wood now because I just picked up 2. We get this last one. So now we basically have the harvesting set up for harvesting trees inside of our game and adding the wood resources to our inventory.